Despite what its populist president says, is Brazil already the world's #1 COVID-19 hotspot? Hello, everyone. I'm François Picard. Welcome to the France 24, a debate. Jair Bolsonaro came to power with the promise of breaking with 4 years of a brutal recession. But as the number of COVID-19 deaths in Brazil officially surpasses that of China, there are fears of an out-of-control pandemic, with Sao Paulo, the biggest city in a nation of 211 million, hardest hit, but also tales of mass graves in Manaus, overrun hospitals in Rio, and citizens sometimes forced to drive hundreds of kilometers for care. And if Bolsonaro no longer calls coronavirus a fiction, he still downplays it, still doesn't social distance, and like Donald Trump in the US, continues to urge a reopening of the economy, going so far as to fire his popular health minister. The argument over deconfinement has accentuated a class divide that again mirrors the cultural battle that rages in the United States. And like with Trump, who the Brazilian president openly admires, there are charges of nepotism and the testing of constitutional boundaries. A Supreme Court judge has green-lighted an investigation that Bolsonaro tried to interfere in the work of the country's federal police force, Brazil's equivalent of the FBI, to block a probe into his own sons. More on how that triggered the spectacular resignation of his superstar justice minister, Sergio Moro, last Friday, and how Brazil's democracy, well, is holding up under the circumstances. Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at COVID-19 and Bolsonaro's Brazil. Joining us from Sao Paulo, Paulo Eduardo Brandão, virologist at the University of Sao Paulo, who is in the lab. Is that right?
That's right. We're helping to test human samples here.
All right, we'll talk more about that in a moment, what you're doing. Mariano Versolato is the health and science editor of Sao Paulo broadsheet Folha de Sao Paulo. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
You're working from home, I see.
Yes, I am. 90% of our newsrooms are working from home at the moment.
All right, from the capital, Brasilia, political strategist Marcio Coimbra is with us. Welcome to the show. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you very much. My pleasure to be here with you.
And we're joined from Rio by Andrew Fishman, managing editor of The Intercept Brazil. Welcome back to the show. How are things in Rio?
Hi, thanks for having me. Well, I don't really know because I've been staying inside for the last few weeks, but in the hospitals, things are getting kind of rough.
Yeah, we'll talk about that in a moment. The France 24 debate on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. If we look at the latest statistics that have been compilated by Johns Hopkins University in the United States, the curve in Brazil is going up, Paulo Eduardo Brandão, and it doesn't seem like it's flattening anytime soon in terms of numbers of new cases and numbers of deaths.
Yeah, that's right. And the other thing is that we are approaching our winter here, and then we're pretty sure that in the winter we're going to have a really explosion on the number of cases, right? This is common in winter. And the other thing, we really don't know the number of infected people. Some colleagues of mine, some epidemiologists, they tell me that it might be 20 times higher than we know today. So it's really underestimated.
Underestimated the numbers of cases, and at the same time, you're facing the same challenges that we are here in France. That is trying to roll out face masks, trying to roll out testing so that we can deconfine. Tell us what's going on in the lab behind you.
Okay, we are here helping the health services here in São Paulo City to test some patients. We receive swabs here every day. We run the PCR tests, and we are a crew of 6 researchers here. But we are really working under our capacity here. We should receive more samples, but the samples are not getting to the labs. This is another issue, right?
Your personal background is in veterinary medicine.
Yes.
Veterinarians are super useful in this kind of situation. Explain why.
Well, vets are much aware about zoonoses, right? And vets are also much aware about coronavirus in general. and we have a bigger ability to work on public health because we are mainly involved in One Health and public health. So that's why vets are of choice now.
I said at the outset, Mariana Versolado, that Sao Paulo is the biggest city, the biggest epicenter. Paint us a picture of what it's like where you are.
Okay, so at the moment, Sao Paulo has 40% of the deaths, of the total deaths in Brazil, and something like 30% of the cases. So that's the most populous city and most populous state in Brazil. So that was expected to be like this. And we had our first case and our first death in the country. So the governor of the state, João Doria, he implemented the social distancing measures in March. He shuttered business, leaving just the essential business open, like supermarkets, pharmacies. Restaurants are allowed to be open too, but only delivering food. You're not allowed to eat at the restaurant.
Are
But
people respecting the rules?
not so much. I mean, each day they're respecting less and less. So we are seeing the rate of people on the streets getting bigger. From 50%, from almost 60% to around 50% now. So it's not like I saw in Italy or France that if you leave your house, you have to have a document showing where you live or how, and you have like some rules, like 1 kilometer around your house. There's nothing like this here. And I think people are getting sick of it, and the support for social distancing measures it's dropping. Even though the numbers of deaths and cases are increasing.
Wow, Andrew Fishman, your reaction to that?
Yeah, I mean, that sounds exactly like what's going on in Brazil and around Brazil, not just in Sao Paulo. There was some studies using cell phone data that during the week of Easter, which was just a few weeks into the quarantine measures, because Brazil was a little bit a few weeks behind in getting its cases here. About 50% of Sao Paulo was actually quarantining, and the rest of people were leaving their homes. And in the state of Amazonas, which the capital is Manaus, it's a state the size of Alaska. It's huge, but it has only 4 million people. They also had very, very low rates of quarantine, and as a result, right now they're one of the largest epicenters of coronavirus cases. Right now, they've been using digging mass graves to bury all the victims, and now they're having to stack the coffins on top of each other. I mean, it's a really horrific situation, and it's not just in Amazonas; it's also other states in the Northeast, and in Rio, there's a days-long line to get a bed in the ICU. And a lot of this is due to the fact that, just like in the United States, Brazil could see this on the horizon. They saw what was happening in China and in Italy, and they failed to prepare. And the federal government has failed to provide support to the states and to the governors, despite their requests for it. And as a result, we're seeing state health systems that are unprepared, doing their best, but unprepared and lacking the resources. And there's lots of unnecessary deaths as a result.
Is that the fault of the current government, Andrew, or has it been decades of not enough investment? Because that's been the charge leveled in this country, that for decades the health services have been neglected by government after government, be it from the left or the right.
So the Brazilian public health system, SUS, is an innovative case worldwide. They provide universal free healthcare for anyone who needs it, and it's really wonderful, and it's really provided an expansion of the accessibility of healthcare in places that never had a clinic before, in remote corners of the country. However, just like many public health services, it's underfunded, and they've been cutting the funding. The funding was being cut under the previous administration, and now it's being cut as well under the Bolsonaro administration. So yeah, we were already in a situation where things were not ideal. However, there was an opportunity to ramp up support and care and to put emergency measures in place, and that window of opportunity that we had was not taken. Just like we've had this massive under testing. We have one of the lowest test rates in the world, and we have very bad data about what that testing actually is. And so, yes, there's a historical problem of lack of resources being dedicated to health, but they've certainly done nothing to help that situation in the current administration.
All right, that issue of testing, I want to get back to with Paulo Eduardo Brandão, but first, let's go to the Capitol. Marcio Cumbria, your thoughts on how much time has been lost, particularly with Jair Bolsonaro, the president, at first calling this a fiction, this COVID-19.
Yes, indeed, there was a problem in Brazil here when the president failed to address the nation since the beginning, realizing how big it was. So I think it happened to other countries as well, not just Brazil, but here we had this problem. So I think it delays our ways to fight the epidemic in Brazil. So
why is that his stance?
I believe he has this gesture that is very likely President Trump and some other right-wing leaders like Boris Johnson, but a lot of them changed their mind over the course of the problem. So we have that in Brazil, the president took longer than Donald Trump or Boris Johnson or any other foreign leader that was denying the pandemic at the time to change his mind. So the delay to change his mind, I think it delayed the fight for a solution in Brazil. And even though he changed his mind a little bit about the pandemic, he even changed the health minister. And the last health minister that we had, he was fighting very tough the problem. He was addressing the problem, talking to the nation, and became very popular. That we believe one of the reasons that the president changed the ministry. Now we have a Ministry of Health that's very much attached to the president and to the military and to their narrative. So it changed a lot the way Brazil is dealing with the pandemic. And I believe that the governors took the lead, and they are leading all the efforts in their states in order to fight the problem. And the federal government took a second stand on it. So it's not important that much what the federal government does for the population itself, but much more what your government measures are taken in order to fight the pandemic.
Yeah, what is it? Something like 20 out of the 27 governors who are openly defiant of the president's policies on this. What more at this point can be done?
I think that the governors now, they took the lead, and I think that's very important. But the problem is that a lot of the funds, a lot of the money come from the federal government in order to fight the problem. So in Brazil now, we have this political scenario that is very unlikely to show us a way out, because there is also a political fight between the president and the governors. I think most of the governors right now, because a lot of governments around the country, a lot of states in Brazil, the cases are growing, like, for example, in Amazonas and in other states. Since Brazil is a very, very big country, and we have like an Europe in Brazil, and we have states that are the size of France and Germany and the UK, and very different ecosystems around the country, I believe we're going to have the peak of the cases in different times in different states. It started now with Amazonas, but right now in the next month, we're going to have a heavy winter down in the south, the states in the south, like Rio Grande do Sul, Paraná, and Santa Catarina. And these states might become the most vivid example of what the pandemic can be about in Brazil. So it will change a little bit over the months along the states.
Paulo Eduardo Brandão, your lab at this point What is it doing in terms of, is it working just on its own? Or is it in coordination with other labs around the country, around the world? Is the government, in your instance, part of the solution or part of the problem right now?
Part of the problem, for sure. There's no central coordination for the labs. There's no general guidance, no general funding. We are on our own. We are trying to get organized here inside the university. So my lab and other labs inside the campus have joined it. We're trying to get funding to run my lab here and to run our tests here. I'm using my own research funding, my research money. So I'm out of money to run my own research because I'm putting all the funding to run tests on the human samples, right? So there's absolutely no central coordination. And another thing, considering the different states, is that we have a major difference in states regarding the laboratory facilities, right? In São Paulo state, we are okay. In Rio, we are okay. But there are no labs, no high-tech labs all around Brazil. And this is the major issue when it gets to detection of the virus, right? So, and the other thing is that the test we are running is quite expensive. It's the PCR, the real-time PCR. We need a really high-tech lab, highly specialized personnel, and we need to get the samples from the hospitals to the lab. And this takes time, money, and lab work. So,
and down the line, as you roll out mass testing in a country where so many people are below the poverty line, how do you do it so that everyone can afford to get tested?
Okay, we should be running the quick test for antibodies. That should be the right thing to do, not to run PCR in a lab like this one, as I said. Because this quick test, this fast test, is quite similar to a pregnancy test. It takes 15 minutes to go. Physicians and nurses can do it by the bedside of the patient, and it's way cheaper, way faster. You don't need to send it to the lab. You don't need to wait for hours, and that can be done everywhere in the country. You don't need a high-tech lab to do that, right? So that should be the right thing to do.
Mariana Versalato, at this point in time, we've been just discussing how you said it yourself a short while ago. The numbers of cases continues to increase. When you listen to Paulo Eduardo Brandão, what's your reaction on where it might go in Brazil?
I mean, the perspectives are not good because we don't actually know what's the scenario here. What's the scenario of the pandemic in Brazil, since we don't have enough tests? Only people that are in very serious conditions normally get tested, or even after they die. You can also try to buy a test. It costs around $70 here in Brazil, but that's not enough. We run an article saying that the government had processed only 0.06% of the population, had tested only 0.06%. That's really, really low. And we saw the numbers in the US. They were getting bigger because they were getting more tests. Then you knew the extension of the pandemic. So it's very a grim perspective.
And yet at the same time, and I'm haunted by what you said earlier in the show, there are those who want to get out of confinement already. And it seems to be, again, a partisan issue almost. Last week, France 24's team went to a rally of supporters of President Bolsonaro. They were outright calling for a return of the military so that the economy could get reopened. Let's take a listen.
Eu sou favorável a entrar lá e exterminar aqueles vermes do Congresso, inclusive o STF. Chegar lá, por mim, eu pendurava eles aqui em praça pública. Seria uma ditadura, seria uma coisa, mas temporariamente.
O governador do Rio está fazendo o povo ficar em casa e não está indo trabalhar. Por quê? Todos querem trabalhar. Se nós estamos aqui, podemos trabalhar. deixa só as pessoas vulneráveis, as pessoas de idade em casa. Agora o povo quer trabalhar, senão vai morrer de fome.
By the way, our reporters got chased away from that rally. They thought they were a TV crew from Globo, which doesn't seem to be very popular among Bolsonaro supporters. Mariana Versalado, your reaction to that, is this becoming, is this accentuating the class divide, COVID-19?
It is. I mean, Bolsonaro has said from the beginning, he downplayed the pandemic from the beginning, saying that the medicine couldn't be more damaging than the disease itself. So the social distancing would create more hunger and unemployment, and that would worsen the situation. But what the WHO was asking was to governments to implement social distancing, but also offer support to the people who would struggle with that. So what we're seeing now is the business putting a lot of pressure for the social distancing to be over, and we are seeing Bolsonaro supporters follow his thoughts and ask for people to return to work. What that means actually is for people more vulnerable to get back to work, and that idea of what Bolsonaro calls vertical isolation, of leaving just the elderly and people with chronic diseases at home, that wouldn't work, because people would, if you live with your grandma, and people with diseases, that would mean that you would come home and make those people sick. So scientists already said it doesn't make sense what these protesters are asking.
Marcio Coimbra, you used to support Jair Bolsonaro. You've broken with him on this issue, reopening the economy as soon as possible. What are your thoughts?
I believe that in order to have an economy running, we need people to run the economy. So we need to take care of the people, and we need to take care of the health system, the health of the people, in order to put the economy running. It's not happening just in Brazil. It's happening everywhere. So all economies all over the globe are facing the same problem. So Brazil could face a problem that is not so big if it helps to deal with this in the right way. If we deal this with the wrong way, probably we're going to generate a more economic depression in the future. So,
and let me ask you on that score, the people we heard at that rally, is there the growing awareness among them, like there has been to a degree here in France, that those the essential workers, the people who work as nurses, as cleaners, who work in the catering business, that these people are the ones who have been the hardest hit by coronavirus? Is there a growing awareness of that among Bolsonaro supporters?
No, not that much awareness among the Bolsonaro supporters. They are thinking much more in terms of the GDP, in order of jobs, and in order of popularity of the government. Because if we have a problem in the economy with the recession and furthermore a depression, that is going to affect the president's popularity. Let's see, in the first year of the administration, Bolsonaro had the GDP was growing 1%. And now in the second year, we're facing probably a recession going back around -5%. And in the third year, we expect that we will grow back around 1%. And then we have the election year. So they're thinking that if they do not find a way to find a solution for the economic crisis, Bolsonaro will probably not be re-elected in 2022. So I think that's the main concern. We're talking politics, we're talking about election, and economy is just a way about talking into politics and re-election. So Bolsonaro, I think he should pay attention more to the health of the people, because if he takes care of the health of the people, then he will have a stronger economy alongside the road. But nevertheless, if he doesn't do anything and he leaves the economy open right now, probably our economy will suffer much more in the near future.
It's been this question throughout the last month. Ever since Andrew Fishman, we began doing these confined shows. Some people are worried about public health, and others say they need to put food on the table. What's the mind frame, for instance, right now where you are in Rio, in the favelas, in the slums?
Well, I think that there was a very important moment, which was the first official presidential declaration by Bolsonaro about the coronavirus crisis. And he basically gave the signal to people that it's okay to go outside, and they need to go outside because people need to work to make money to survive so they don't go hungry. Anyone who lives in a favela in Brazil knows that the government is not there to help them, because if they were, they would have, basic services and plumbing and security, which are not present in many of these communities. And so when the president gave that message, I think they understood very well. And we actually published some reporting from our staff that said that, in their neighborhood, in their working class neighborhood, it was like day and night. The people were observing quarantine, people were staying at home. And then the president gave this signal, and then the next day, non-essential businesses were opening, and everyone was talking about how, we really do need to, go back to work because we're not going to starve. The government, which is the economic policy, which is pushed forth by the finance minister, Paulo Guedes, who is a former advisor to Chilean dictator Augusto Pinochet. He's a neoliberal right-wing economist that just wants to do cuts and neoliberal reforms, reduce taxes, reduce spending, reduce regulations. And he's insisted that that's the path forward for Brazil to come out of this crisis, which goes against what every other major economy in the world is doing. Everyone is doing stimulus spending. The military wing of the government was just able to pass a large 5-year stimulus plan of infrastructure spending, like $35 billion, more or less. And he was able to get that frozen just today, because he doesn't want to get into deficit spending, even in this incredible crisis.
But and he does, hang on, Paulo Guedes does believe in social distancing and has distanced himself to a certain degree from the president when it comes to how seriously to take COVID-19. And Andrew, I got to ask you, you had the boom years in Brazil when Lula was president, the commodity prices were high. You've just had all these years of recession, and we're headed towards for a prolongation that could be very brutal. What do you do if you're the government?
Well, it's a very difficult situation to be in. I don't think anyone would like to be the president of Brazil at this very moment, because it's really tricky. But what other countries have been doing is they've been spending, and they've been focusing on health, and they've been prioritizing the health, because what Marcio said was exactly right, that if you just open everything up and move forward to pretend as if nothing has changed, business as usual, in the name of the economy, you're going to have a lot of unnecessary deaths. You're going to have a lot of unnecessary turmoil, and that's going to hurt the economy. So it's counterproductive. So what everyone else has been doing, and what Brazil seems to be one of the very few countries in the world that's decided not to do this, is to insist on social distancing, ramp up testing, so they can find a safe way to slowly and gradually come out of quarantine measures, and spend to make sure that people have the safety net that they need, that no one's going hungry, that they're trying to save as many jobs as possible, so that once people can come out of quarantine, the basic fundamentals of the economy will be there, so that there can be a quicker recovery. And that's not what they're doing.
All right. There was on Monday a federal judge, a Supreme Court judge, who said that a 60-day investigation can go on into Bolsonaro and charges of nepotism involving his sons, that he may have fired the equivalent of the FBI, the head of the federal police, in order to try to block an investigation. It's what led last Friday to the resignation of his star justice minister, Sergio Moro. Sergio Moro was the investigating magistrate who brought down Lula when he was trying to run for president once again. It's a France 24 report. Let's take a look.
As Brazil grapples with a public health crisis, the country seems to be facing a political one too. Sergio Moro, Brazil's justice minister, handed in his resignation on Friday after President Bolsonaro fired and replaced the head of the federal police, Mauricio Valexio.
O grande problema de realizar essa troca, primeiro haveria uma violação de uma promessa que me foi feita inicialmente, que eu teria carta branca. Em segundo lugar, não haveria uma causa para essa substituição. E estaria claro que estaria havendo ali uma interferência política na Polícia Federal.
Moro became popular after becoming the face of an anti-corruption crackdown in Brazil. It led to the convictions of powerful businessmen, political figures, and the imprisonment of former President Lula. Moro accuses Bolsonaro of replacing Brazil's former head of the federal police with one of his close allies, a move Moro claims will give Bolsonaro access to police investigations, especially those that concern members of his own family. It's a claim that the president firmly denies.
Não são verdadeiras as insinuações de que eu desejaria saber sobre investigações em andamento. Nos quase 16 meses em que esteve à frente do Ministério da Justiça, o senhor Sérgio Moro sabe que jamais lhe procurei para interferir nas investigações que estavam sendo realizadas.
The resignation of Moro is the latest hit in the country's deepening political crisis after Bolsonaro fired Brazil's health minister, who advocated for stricter quarantine measures, which the president opposed. Brazil's public prosecutor has announced an investigation will be made into Moro's accusations against the president. If they are found to be true, Bolsonaro could face impeachment proceedings.
Could face impeachment proceedings. It's the front page of your Tuesday edition of Folha de Sao Paulo, Mariana Versalado. Really, could there be an impeachment? We had one for Dilma Rousseff. Could there be an impeachment of Jair Bolsonaro?
I think it's too early to know. What the headline of Folha says is that Bolsonaro still keeps his support despite of this political turmoil and firing his popular health minister, and now with the resignation of the star justice minister Sergio Moro. What we are seeing now is that Bolsonaro is going to do some political maneuvers to try to stay in power. So he's starting to negotiate with members of the Congress that he always try to keep himself separated and apart, saying that he's the new politics, he's the new, he's against the system. So now he's starting to negotiate with this very same system to remain in power. So that's what we're going to see. So I think now
he doesn't have a political party per se in Congress.
No, he doesn't. He left his party. So now he's vulnerable, so he has to negotiate with the members of the Congress, and now we're going to see how his supporters will see that, because that's one of his main slogans. His anti-system, he's anti the old politics. So we're going to see, we're going to have to follow to see how this will be considered by his followers, by his supporters, and if he still keep this support after all this.
Yes, I read, and tell me if I'm wrong, Andrew Fishman, there's a little more than a quarter of the electorate that is still strongly supporting Jair Bolsonaro, come what may. And well, the charges, some of them pertain to social media and troll farms and the such. And it is on social media that Jair Bolsonaro is the strongest.
Yeah, he's very strong on social media. There's a giant Twitter hashtag yesterday in support of Bolsonaro that 70,000 plus people tweeted with a typo in the name, which is hilarious, and it suggests that obviously there's a troll farm is pushed out the hashtag, but they put the wrong spelling in, because there's not 70,000 people misspelling the president's name exactly in the same way. And that's exactly one of the main issues. One of the main issues that's at the center of this whole political chaos with the director of the federal police and with Sergio Moro resigning. The allegation is that in this investigation that's ongoing is that Carlos, his son, who's a city councilman in Rio, and his son Eduardo, who's a congressman, are coordinating this what is called the Office of Hate. Which is basically using public employees and public monies to fund a massive troll operation. They call it a digital militia, to attack the Congress, to attack the Supreme Court, to attack anyone who they think is their enemies. We at The Intercept have been the targets of this when we did critical reporting on Sergio Moro last year. And there's also other very, very serious investigations going into him and his family. For example, his son Flavio is accused of being the leader of a criminal syndicate where they were embezzling funds from his office as a state congressman in Rio. He's now a senator, and using that money, passing it to gangsters who were doing we were the first ones to report this part, that passing it to gangsters to fund illegal construction that he was on stolen lands that he was then getting money back from. And there's signs that his father is involved in this as well, and that the gangster at the center of this is one of the people that's one of the prime suspects in the political assassination of Marielle Franco, the city councilwoman who was murdered in 2018 in Rio. And that's just the beginning. There are many, many other investigations, including the organizers behind that the rally 2 Sundays ago that you showed the footage of. That they were calling for a military coup and for the end of quarantine. Bolsonaro went to that rally, and he said, I'm here because I believe in you. Those people that were saying those things earlier, he believes in them. And they're investigating that because that's quite probably a violation of the national security law that prohibits advocating a military dictatorship.
So tell us,
we
Andrew,
had one here.
This is a country that knew military dictatorship a few decades back. But when you see that you have a Supreme Court judge green-lighting the investigation, when you see that there's talk of impeachment, would you say on the whole that Brazil's democracy is weathering this storm fairly well?
No, I would not say that. We've been in chaos since 2014, basically. And then with the impeachment of Dilma in 2016, things really started, trust in institutions and the strength of the institutions has really been faltering. And we're at a point where I don't think many people really have faith in the institutions or in the president. I mean, that's exactly why that was the pitch of Bolsonaro's election campaign, that, the system doesn't work. We got to throw them all out. Everything's corrupt. Nothing works, and we're going to start from scratch. The equivalent of drain the swamp.
Let me bring in Marcio Coimbra on this, because you're highly critical during this conversation of Bolsonaro. There was a tweet put out by one of his sons. Together, you were at the White House back in 2018. Did you know back then that these kinds of charges could one day be leveled against them?
No, we never thought at that time. At the time when I invited Eduardo Bolsonaro to come to the White House, I used to be living in Washington before, and I worked with the Republican Party at that time in Washington. So I invited Eduardo to go to the White House, introduce him to the administration, to Jared Kushner, then to Congress, to senators, congressmen, and to Giuliani in New York. We didn't believe at that time that some things like this could happen, because at the time in the government we were choosing Moro to be the justice minister, Paulo Guedes to be the finance minister. So we thought that we would see a fight against corruption on one side, and on the other side, a liberal view of the economy. So we didn't expect at that time that things could change like they did. And so unfortunately, things are turning around like we're seeing at this time. But I believe that the government will not be impeached at this time because Bolsonaro is working really hard in order to create in Congress to build a coalition around him with centrist parties. Those centrist parties, if they get positions in the government, they will exchange that for votes, and then they will allow the government to survive. It doesn't mean that the government will have enough votes to pass reforms, but it will have enough votes in order not to fall. So we're going to be at this time at this situation that is very hard at this point. We're not going to be able to do reforms, but the government will not be impeached. And so Brazil probably is going to be paralyzed for the next years if that happens.
For the next years.
So yeah, we need to pay attention to that.
We're running short on time. Let's end this conversation where we began it, in the lab at the University of Sao Paulo with Paulo Eduardo Brandão. And can you have impeachment and huge political turmoil in the midst of everything you're facing there?
Well, that should be quite bad, but I think that this government is using these not as a scapegoat. You can call it a escape virus, right? So they are just using a smoke made by this mask, and they can keep doing these bad things they are doing. So it's like an escape virus, I should say.
It's like an escape virus. And just in that report, and again, this was last Friday, we saw the president with his cabinet behind him standing shoulder to shoulder. What was your reaction when you saw that image?
I cannot believe it. I cannot believe it. Like, everyone is using masks, is keeping distance, and he, who should give an example, is doing absolutely everything wrong. So it was a shame. I'm sorry for Brazil, but it was a shame for the world.
All right, well, we wish you the best, and we wish you the best of luck and strength as you continue your important research into finding those tests, Paulo Eduardo Brandão. I want to thank Mariana Versalado for also joining us from Sao Paulo, Andrew Fishman in Rio, Marcio Coimbra in the capital, Brasilia. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate. There's more on our website, france24.com. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Facebook. Bye for now.